Welcome to Music Mania. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and this week we have a couple of exciting new releases to talk about, and several things that I've been listening to in my own time that I'm excited to talk about here very close to the end of the video as well. So let's just kind of jump into things like I normally would, except this week I do have one release from last week that I actually missed, if I'm not mistaken. I suppose I should actually check when this single actually dropped to make sure that I'm not lying to you, but I'm pretty sure it's something that dropped last week that I didn't know about until after I did last week's Music Mania episode. Yes, this single dropped last week, so we'll start off with what I missed last week. It's just the one single here. That is Sargasso, or whatever you want to pronounce it, by Vildharda. And since coming around to enjoying Mirar a little bit earlier this year, whereas I wasn't really into the fall thing, like, at all for the most part, every single time I've tried it, I was surprisingly able to enjoy the single a little bit. It makes me wonder if I were to return to these guys' couple of albums that they've put out, if maybe I'd enjoy them a little bit more than when I tried them, like, I don't know, at the beginning of last year or something, and I was just not a fan. I think this single is okay, but it makes me wonder if I'd maybe enjoy Vildharda a little bit more, because I'm starting to appreciate Thal a bit. But again, actually, I'm going to edit that rating. That was a 3.5 star. It was a little bit better than just 3. It's an average song. I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting to, because I'm not really a fan of the band overall, but maybe I need to go back and re-explore some of what they've done before, because my tastes are changing just a little bit. But after that, we actually get into a couple of the new album releases for the week. So let's start off with The Father of Make Believe, Vaxis Act 3 by Coheed and Cambria. Coheed and Cambria is a band that I actually really enjoy overall. I tend to get really obsessed with them for short periods of time and listen to nothing but them basically every second of every day for a few weeks at a time. And I've largely enjoyed the vast bulk of their discography. Vaxis 3 is pretty similar to Vaxis 2 in my mind, in that I think it's a fun and enjoyable sound, good album. Not bad in any real way, shape, or form, but also not super impressive in the way that some of Coheed and Cambria can really end up being. I also think that part of this is the fact that Vaxis 2 and 3 seem to be a very different sound than Vaxis 1 was, for example, so you end up with a weird kind of mismatch there tonally. I think I do need to, however, give both of these two albums, this one and its immediate predecessor, another listen through in either case, because it would be more fair to them to do so, compared to, you know, all of the massive amount of times I've listened to most of their other albums. Even so, I would say I recommend, I don't need a quotation mark there, I recommend The Father of Make Believe. I guess I'll add the actual, you know, Vaxis Act 3 in there, and then I'll quickly copy and paste my review. And I don't need to copy the standout tracks. I think the album is solid, but it's not my favorite thing from Coheed and Cambria even still. Next up is Chug Machine, which is kind of a surprise drop. Alex, I don't know, Chichikailo or something, however you would pronounce his name, is an artist that I believe Nick Nocturnal shouted out in a, you know, artists with less than 1,000 monthly listeners or something like that video not too long ago, and the song clips from that video that I heard from this artist I liked enough that I followed him, and there's a, you know, a sort of album EP drop here to go along with it, and I think this thing is actually pretty solid. In fact, I completely forgot to write a review for this somehow, so we'll go ahead and, you know, mark the I recommend Chug Machine. I think it's solid instrumental. It's instrumental, actually. It's something important to note here. I will put my standout tracks because I at least did those. I think as a metalcore album, it's pretty good. And most of the instrumental metal stuff that I listen to falls a little bit more in the sort of proggy side of things with a large, like, gent, I guess, influence. So for this to be a little bit more of your typical type of core stuff, and by typical, that's not an offensive term at all. It's a little bit more of what you might predict you'd find from metalcore in an instrumental setting, something dedicated to being that kind of sound instrumentally, I found to be pretty enjoyable and interesting. So I'm going to actually write a review of this really quick. So that's going to be the review. And I think actually I'm going to talk about this album, and I think actually I'm going to go back and retroactively say that Chug Machine here is more of an EP. It's 8 tracks, it's like 20 something minutes, so like it's kind of a full album, but it's enough in that gray area that I'm just going to include it in the EP section, and so that I can give it a little bit more of a shot in my album and EP rankings of the year. I'm putting this in my EP rankings so that it can kind of stand beside some of that shorter material versus some of the longer albums. So there's that. But next up, we're going to be moving into some of the single releases for the week. Starting off with Emergence by Sleep Token, which I love. Take Me Back to Eden. I absolutely fell in love with that album, but I fell in love with it as an album. I remember being not impressed with any of the singles at all and wondering why the band was, getting so much attention at the time. Very clearly, the single's getting a pretty good reception so far as this release is concerned. In fact, if I were to refresh this tab, you'd see a couple extra ratings in there. I guess actually the average rating went down because of one of those being a low rating. Even so, I think Emergence has been obviously blowing up to a degree that is no surprise for Sleep Token at this point, but I chose not to listen to this single. The album's already announced, it's coming in May, so it's just a couple of months away. I'm going to wait until the full album because I don't trust listening to Sleep Token's singles, and I want to listen to the album in full and hope to have a experience with it kind of the same way that I was able to have an experience with Take Me Back to Eden, because Take Me Back to Eden I did not enjoy until I listened to it as an album, and basically until I got through the whole album, in which something about it clicked and was like, oh wait, no, this is actually really good, and then I became obsessed with it. And I'm worried that if I listen to singles going into a new album that I'll not enjoy it as much for whatever reason. So I do want to go into a full album experience for Sleep Token as an album experience, so I'm choosing not to listen to this single on purpose. American Death, released by Rivers of Nile, second single for their self-titled album, or yeah, that's true. And it's an okay single, I would say. It's not terrible. The problem is the chorus, actually. I think the clean vocals and the chorus are not put into the song very well. They're not a good transition. So the first half of the song is actually super solid. I was like, okay, how am I feeling about this compared to the first single? And the chorus just kind of ruins it for me. I would say this would easily be a 3.5 to 4 star song, if not for the current chorus as it exists. I just did not really enjoy it that much. Next up is 8.6 Blackout by Disembodied Tyrant, another artist that has a lot of blowing up that they've been doing with different singles and releases that they've been doing. I think this song is okay. It's kind of on the lower end of average for me. Wasn't super standout. I didn't really remember much of the song afterwards, except for the last minute when it finally does something a little bit more interesting. But the first few minutes of it just are not particularly memorable in any way. So that's what I'm going to release that song and probably get some backlash from it. Love Letter releasing a new single called Toothless, however, I got a little bit more out of. I did enjoy Toothless a good bit. Solid single. I need to listen to more from these guys because what little bit I have listened to, I have enjoyed, and they never really seem to go above a certain runtime and don't waste time as a result, and I enjoyed Toothless. It's a solid song. Next up, I remembered about a band that I, for some reason, wasn't following on Spotify for the last couple years, even though I listened to their 2023 album, Perspective. They released another single this year. This is the second single that they've actually released in 2025, Over You, and it's actually the 6th single that they've released with kind of this kind of generic female on the cover art style that they have. So I'm assuming that these are all 6 singles for an upcoming album that they're probably dropping pretty soon. Their 2023 album had 6 singles released for it, so I assume that that's what this is. I only listened to the one single so far, but it was pretty good, definitely decent. I enjoyed what it was doing, and I enjoyed the ideas it had. It also reminded me a little bit of what is the band called? 1000 something? Is it 1000 Below? Is that the name of the band? I might be misremembering. 1 second. If I could remember how the alphabet works. Yes, 1000 Below, their last album. There were a couple hints of what that album was doing on portions of this song, so I'm kind of interested to see what Perspective does next. But now we're going to go into my listens, in which we're going to be talking about pretty much just Whitechapel this week, because as we all know, last week Hymns and Dissonance released, and I did do my normal style of music board review for Hymns and Dissonance. Definitely nothing like, you know, super extensive, but I ended up re-listening to Hymns and Dissonance several times. So I adjusted my rating up to 5 stars after re-listening to it, because my initial rating when I talked about it last week was 4.5 stars. And then I listened to it a third time, in which I was like, no, I think this is actually a perfect album, when I was really becoming obsessed with it. And then I listened to it a fourth time, in which I was, you know, beating a dead horse, hence this title here. But I talked about, you know, will hopefully be finished by the end of the day writing a full dedicated review for the album. And that's what I ended up doing. I listened to it another time, a fifth time there, and ended up with that 4,600 word script of why I love Hymns and Dissonance, and that is actually a video that is here on the second channel. You can go ahead and watch that if you are so inclined. I recommend you do so, because it's maybe my favorite album review that I've written, you know, so I'm very happy with it. Love this album as well. Following listening to this album so many times, I did go back and listen to a couple other Whitechapel albums, starting off with The Valley is kind of the obvious one to give a quick shout out to. And I was really surprised with The Valley, because I wasn't super into it, actually. I found myself shockingly disappointed. So instead of doing my normal I recommend thing, I'm going to say I was weirdly disappointed with The Valley, because The Valley it has a place in my heart, because it is basically the reason why I'm into deathcore. You could say that this was my gateway album for deathcore as a genre. I think it has some solid songs. I think it's definitely not terrible. You know, it's a good album, but there's certain aspects to the soundscape that don't fully mesh together, in my opinion. I'm gonna have to edit that rating, but that's okay. I can do that after the fact. The Valley's good, but like some of the things don't fully flesh together for me. Like the track listing doesn't fully come together, except for like Brimstone Through Black Bear is a really great train of songs, and all 3 of those are my favorite songs on the album. But most everything else, it doesn't just fit. It's not a fully cohesive body of work for me, and I don't know why that is. I know that's going to be kind of a hot take, but I found myself a little bit disappointed by this. And to be clear, I thought that maybe at least a little bit of the reason why I was disappointed was because of how much I loved Hymns and Dissonance. And it's like, okay, did the new album just end up being so good that I'm finding myself, you know, retroactively biased against everything else? And it turns out that's basically not the case, because following listening to The Valley, I re-listened to Kin, you know, the next chapter in that story, both sonically and, you know, lyrically. The actual story of the album, Kin kind of continues what's going on there, and Kin is a much better album than The Valley is. And that's not to say that it's like that much better of an album, but like it kind of is. I would say that I actually highly recommend Kin, even though like it's kind of a surprise. I only listened to Kin once when it dropped, if I'm not mistaken. So let me copy all of the standout tracks in there. It's solid. It's really enjoyable. I think it's pretty close to being perfect. As far as this type of soundscape, as far as what the band was doing with The Valley and Kin is a much more refined version of that sound, and I found most of the story more actively compelling from a story perspective. So the fact that I enjoyed Kin a lot more than The Valley, I was actually really shocked by, but that's how things go down sometimes. I think that's going to be an unpopular opinion for a lot of people, but that's just how I ended up feeling. I need to go back to listening to more of Whitechapel's back catalog, because it's been a very long time, and most of those records I've only listened to like maybe once or twice in the long run. So I should give more of them a little bit more of a chance, especially since, you know, these two and even Hymns and Dissonance are a little bit different. So I want to listen to some of their older stuff, kind of maybe even be able to do a discography deep dive for these guys. But that is going to be the end of this video. I appreciate you for watching if you did, and I appreciate you for potentially tolerating my excessively bad at times opinions. So thank you for all of that. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I would really appreciate if you checked out that Whitechapel album review. Otherwise, I hope to see you guys in the next video.